Welcome back. All right, so we're less than 2 weeks from free agency, and the Vancouver Canucks. Last week, Rick Tocchet coming out and saying we could lose 7 players. Now, their pending UFAs are Bluger, Joshua, Lafferty, and Lindholm up front, Cole, Friedman, Myers, Zadorov on the back end, and DeSmith in net. More than 7 there, so I guess there's some guys that he feels pretty confident they're going to re-sign. But there's a lot of talking in the market about how greedy Pettersson is. Seems to be the main thrust of this. Now, Pettersson's cap hit is high. I'm not going to say it's not. 11.6 million until 2032. I'm also going to point out that this is a contract that's starting, and we know that contracts that are really expensive at the start of those contracts tend to become more of a bargain contract. Contracts are going to go up this summer, and I said in a comment yesterday, I think people are going to be surprised on July the 1st at some of the contracts and some of these cap hits. They're going to be very high. And there are going to be some contracts that GMs regret within a couple of years. Now, I really think that with Pettersson, we know he wasn't 100%. We know how well he can play, and he was still above a point per game this season. So I have no real concern that Pettersson's going to be terrible. He's going to be a 60-point forward going forward. I don't have any concern about Pettersson. JT Miller's $8 million cap hit till 2030, the one everybody was complaining about when he signed that contract. I don't hear the complaints about that now. I'm not saying they won't come back, but Miller had an absolutely ridiculous season after what was a good second half to last season and a rough first half. He clearly meshes better with Tocchet than he did with Boudreau. Now, Brock Besser's $6.65 million cap hit comes off the books next year, and odds are he'll probably want a raise. The salary cap's supposed to go up again next summer as well, so there should be some cap space there to keep him around unless they decide they're going to move on from him. And of course, Brock Besser trade rumors have gone away, but how long will it be before they come back if he's on an expiring deal? My guess is pretty quickly. Garland, $4.95 million cap hit for 2 more years. At points last year, there were rumors that the Garland contract was potentially, one that the Canucks wanted to move on from. I'm going to go ahead and say with the way Garland played in the playoffs, the way he played down the stretch, I don't think Garland's going anywhere. And there's also the fact, too, that there are still teams that won't necessarily take on that contract for Garland as well as he did play. Mikheyev I've got in purple because it feels like Mikheyev may very well end up being the player they move. I don't know how you move the contract. $4.75 million until 2026. That to me is absolutely, that's not a great contract. Mikheyev, of course, who's struggled with injuries, and now he's just struggled. He had so many problems with hitting the net. And I think part of that's probably psychological. I've seen people comparing him to Mason Raymond. I'm going to say there's definitely some comparables to Mason Raymond. Raymond was a talented forward. At times, he had troubles getting the puck in the net as well. You've got Suter, $1.6 million for another year. Then he's an unrestricted free agent. Hoglander for $1.1 million for a year. He's restricted free agent at the end of that. Podkolzin for 2 years at $1 million. Restricted free agent after that. Aman came up. I thought he played well. $825,000 until 2026, where he's a restricted free agent. And Phil DiGiuseppe has 1 year left on a league minimum contract, so $775,000. So if you count it up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 NHL level forwards right there. And down here in the wings, I've got all forwards on the board. There's Lekkerimaki. Maybe he ends up pushing his way into a role. Ratu, is Ratu going to be ready for next year? Maybe he gets some bottom 6 minutes. They called Baines up a couple of times. He didn't look great during that last call-up, but you know what? Sometimes it takes a little longer for players to develop. And I was impressed with Linus Karlsson in the playoffs. I thought when he got in there, he played relatively well. I wouldn't mind seeing him in a fourth-line role either. One thing the Canucks are going to have to do is have bargains in their lineup. We talk about teams like Tampa Bay and teams like Colorado and teams that are successful and stay in the hunt from 1 year to the next. They're able to develop players from within. They're able to call guys up from the AHL who contribute and play really, really well. And that's something the Canucks have struggled with, historically struggled with. Regardless of which area you're looking at, the depth for the Vancouver Canucks at the AHL level has very often been not necessarily where you want it to be. I do feel like what they've been building here in Abbotsford is pretty strong, and so I think that could very well decide whether or not the Canucks are still in the mix next year or if they do fall back, how that works out. On the blue line, you've got Quinn Hughes, $7.85 million cap hit until 2027. That is a huge bargain on the blue line. Susie, $3.25 million for 2 more years. And Juleson at league minimum, $775,000 for the 1 more year. Hronek's a restricted free agent, so they still have, the control over the Hronek situation. But there's lots of rumors about how much Hronek's looking for, and I don't know how the Canucks are going to necessarily make the math work. Currently, they have, for next season, $24,078,333 in cap space, according to Cap Friendly, which isn't dark yet. It's going to go dark soon. Go get your information from Cap Friendly while you can. But Hronek, if it does come in the $7 to $8 million range or maybe higher, I don't know what the prices are going to look like in July. I really think we're going to get some sticker shock from the prices these players cost in a couple of weeks. But Hronek's a defenseman that had a very good first half of the season, mediocre second half of the season, and a pretty rough playoff run as well. So for the Vancouver Canucks, I will agree with people who feel like keeping Zadorov might be more important than keeping Hronek, but this is where things get a little bit tricky. So I will talk about this over here in a moment. The unrestricted free agents for the Canucks on the blue line, Cole, who sounds like he's gone. Friedman's probably gone too. Myers is willing to come back at a lower cap hit. I think Myers probably does, and I think if the cap hit's a little less than half of the $6 million that he was costing the team this past year, I think Myers is fine as a third pairing defenseman. And then, of course, there's Zadorov, who, again, we will talk about. In net, they have Demko. It's a $5 million cap hit for Demko for 2 more years. Huge bargain. So, does Pettersson get paid a little bit more than maybe he should? I'll go down that rabbit hole. Sure, let's go ahead and say that. But to say they don't have any cap space because of the Pettersson contract, to me, doesn't work, because you've got Demko on a bargain contract. You've got Hughes on a bargain contract. Considering Besser had a 40-goal season, that's a bargain. Considering the season Miller had, $8 million is a pretty good cap hit for him. The Mikheyev contract's the one that stands out to me as being an iffy contract. And if Susie has more health troubles, that may very well be a contract, too, that we look at and say, be nice to have the extra cap space there. When Susie's in the lineup, he's quite good, but it's a matter of him staying there, right? Now, in net, you've also got Shilovs, who is a restricted free agent this summer, so he's going to get paid. Let's just say $1.5 million for 2 years, right? So $3 million contract altogether. That then takes him down to $22.5 million. So again, we'll talk about the UFA situation in a moment here. But DeSmith, UFA, probably going to market. Again, looks like Shilovs is ready, so give him the chance. I talked about the players in this part of the board, so we'll go over here. Zadorov is seeking, and again, the word on the street is $5.5 million a year. It could be as high as $6 million a year for Zadorov. He had a really strong run with Vancouver. I don't think giving him a $6 million a year deal would work for the team or for us as fans. I don't think we take that well either. He was great in the playoffs. He absolutely was. He was very good. And if he gets that $6 million cap hit from another team, all the best to him. But while it's not a small sample size necessarily, there's no reason to think that Zadorov consistently will be that good for Vancouver. There is that chance, too, that the contract doesn't necessarily age all that well. And for Vancouver, I think you're better off to have an actual plan going forward for how much all these players are going to cost. Look on the free agent market. And I used Dakota Joshua here as an example. So Joshua, rumored to be in the $3 million range as a starting price as a free agent, could end up in the $4.5 million range because he's physical, he can score, he does a little bit of everything. At the time that they picked up Dakota Joshua from St. Louis, it was an ad that they said they felt that he could end up being a third liner on the team, which, I mean, some St. Louis fans thought, yeah, no, he's really good, and some didn't think necessarily he had that much potential offensively. The Vancouver Canucks are going to need to prove that their pro scouting department does a really good job, and they're going to need to find some value adds. And so I don't have a problem with that, because this is something that management has done already. I think the Zadorov addition was smart, really good move. Are there other defensemen out there that play like Zadorov? Probably not. Probably not on the market right now. But can you find physical defensemen? Yes. Can you find another offensively minded defenseman on the market? Probably. And the most important thing for the Canucks right now is they have some cap space to play around with. Now, Elias Lindholm, He's going to market. Reportedly had turned down a deal from the Canucks that had the cap hit at $7 million per. Lindholm had a really strong playoff, and I would love to have seen him, re-sign in Vancouver and see what he can do. But based on the fact that you're talking about a long-term contract as well, and maybe more than $7 million in a cap hit, and looking at that $24 million they have, I'm not sure that's a smart use of the money. And so again, for me, I'm not panicking about the players that are going because I understand that the smart teams are very often the ones that make the tough calls and don't necessarily just run it back and try again. But the teams that win very often are teams that aren't shy. The Florida Panthers, as I'm recording this, right on the verge of potentially winning a Stanley Cup. And they have not been shy themselves about going out and getting value adds. Look at Gustav Forsling as an example. Pick him up on waivers, and now he is one of the better defensemen in the NHL. So that's where really good pro scouting can get you, and you get guys on contracts that are really good. You pick up players that they just need a change of scenery to turn things around. And so for Vancouver, I will say this, early in the season, I took some heat for saying, hey, I don't know if the Canucks are this good necessarily. Their PDO number was way too high. It did come down in the second half of the season. You can see the team kind of slowed down, which was the expectation. But this is a team that can still play really, really well. They can still be a playoff team. I'm not concerned with finishing first in the division or anything. I think just getting this team back into the playoffs, the experience they had this year can absolutely roll over into next year and make them a better team. And again, if Demko can stay healthy throughout the season and into the playoffs, that goes a long way too. He is one of the best goaltenders in the league. So when you have one of the best goaltenders in the league in Demko, one of the best defensemen in the league in Hughes, and a forward in Pettersson, who had over 100 points just last year, I don't buy into the doom and gloom, and I think this is a team that, as long as Patrick Allvin has a financial structure that works, and if it adds depth, because we know this team has needed better depth than what they've had in seasons past, you're better off looking to improve the depth than spend way more money than you're comfortable spending on players. That, yes, other teams are going to spend that money, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the Canucks are foolish for not being willing to spend that amount of money, because cap space is gold in this day and age. So I wanted to do a video on this because I do know there's some panic among Canucks fandom and some, they can't be cheap and they got to bring these guys back. While I did agree with that sentiment when it came to Chris Tanev years back, I totally understood why Markstrom left. And it turned out it was the best thing for Demko that he got a chance to be the guy in Vancouver. And so if Zadorov leaves, it's a matter of being able to find somebody. There are definitely some decent defensemen in Abbotsford. I don't know if there's any that are ready to jump up like Juleson has for Vancouver, but maybe, right? So at any rate, it will be interesting to see how much money Hronek costs, if that price is too high, and if the Canucks need to make a move in order to make that work. How much Shelovs gets, again, I don't think it's going to be a lot of money, but you have to keep an eye on that cap space. You can't just throw that money out. So even if Pettersson made, say, $9.6 million instead of $11.6, and you have $26 million in cap space instead of 24, I don't think it would change where the Canucks are at with these three players. I don't think it means that Zadorov would necessarily be coming back. And again, I'm not happy about seeing these players leave, but I do have some faith in the Canucks management, which I didn't the last few years under Benning. But they've done a good job. They've done a good job so far. And sometimes letting players go to market rather than signing them for arguably a little more money than you think they're worth, again, as management, I think that can be the right move to make. Again, talking about teams that can be a little bit ruthless, Vegas is never shy about making big changes. And we always kind of point and go, that's where they've screwed up. That's where Vegas has screwed things. That's a terrible move. Look when they basically ditched Fleury and ditched Pacioretty. We're like, that's bad karma. That's just going to hurt him. And then it didn't. So at any rate, we'll see what happens. But the idea that all these players are going to go to market, I don't think is necessarily an awful thing for the Vancouver Canucks. because the reality is they're trying to build this team up to be a consistent contender. And sometimes part of that is maybe being a little bit tighter with the purse strings for certain players. And that seems to be what the case is here. But keep in mind, we have, it's June 18th, so we have 12 more days that they can negotiate, or they could work on a trading of the rights of certain players if they decide to do that. And maybe players like Dakota Joshua maybe comes back and goes, you know what, I want to stick around, and they work something out. So there's still time to work things out. We shall see, but my panic level is still at 0 because it's June. They don't start playing until October, so I don't have any panic about it. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you've not done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.